Okay, so welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So today we have a special live episode of the AtheroTalk coming to you straight from the EAS Congress. So I'm Emiel van der Vorst from the Department of Internal Medicine Cardiology at the University in Aachen in Germany.
And hello everyone, I'm Azin from the Institute of Genetic Epidemiology in Innsbruck, Austria. And we are thrilled to have you all join us today, especially you as our audience and also our podcast listeners listening to this right now. And we have, it's going to be a very promising conversation.
So we're diving into a topic today that I think many researchers think about, but they don't really openly talk about it that much, how to secure major grants and research grants. So, and what it really takes to get them. So already for the audience here present live, we will also have a Q&A session at the end. So if you think about questions, please already remember them and we can go through them at the end.
And we couldn't have asked for any better guests than what we have, so please join us in welcoming two leading scientists in the field of atherosclerosis, Professor Judith Sluimer and Professor Keith Channon.
So before we start, may we ask you to both briefly introduce yourself to our audience and the listeners. Let's start with Professor Sluimer.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. So my name is Judith Sluimer and I work as a basic scientist at the Cardiovascular Research Institute in Maastricht University in the Netherlands. I'm also a mother of two and I'm married to a scientist. My training was done in Maastricht for a PhD and I did a postdoc at Columbia University in New York. And my team at the moment is working on how to resolve the cardiovascular aging and atherosclerosis, and we use multi-omics, cell, organ, and animal models and human tissue biobanking to achieve that. But I think that today I'm here because I was awarded the fourth, the most mature state of the Netherlands Scientific Organization's career grants. Is that right?
Great, thank you. And Professor Chen?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to take part. My name's Keith Channon. I'm a cardiovascular scientist and a clinical cardiologist based in Oxford in the UK. I was a research fellow many years ago at Duke University, funded by the British Heart Foundation. I run a research group interested in the basic mechanisms of atherosclerosis and how those relate to cardiovascular risk.
Thanks a lot. So, of course, you're both very experienced researchers. And do you remember the very first grant application? And what was the experience like for you? Professor Channon, maybe we start with you.
Well, that was definitely a long time ago. When I look back, I think it was probably the most important grant that I ever wrote and ever won. Because your first important grant really sets the scene for your scientific research career. And that time is a really special one because it gives you your first steps into research. And the things you do then have a really big influence on the rest of your career for many years ahead. I would say that the most important things about that grant were not the project and not the science. It was the people that I worked with and the place that I worked at. And I think those are the most important things that ultimately I remember about the grant application. And looking back, for those of you in the early parts of your research career, you might think it's hard, but it was one of the best times in my life. You could focus on the research, you could spend time in the lab, and you didn't have to worry quite so much about some of the other aspects that tend to make big research grants more onerous later on in your career.
How about you, Professor Sluimer? How was your first big attempt and also was it successful?
I was lucky enough to get this first postdoctoral fellowship, which is called the Rubicon, to go to Columbia University to work with Ira Tabas. And that was, of course, a game changer, like Professor Channon already said, in my career. The network, the exposure to the top science, it was very excellent. But I remember also that when I got the news, it was a bit of a sour win because I had two other colleagues who were applying and they didn't get the grant. So, it's sort of setting the stage also for later questions. It's not always about, you're not always getting them. It's quite tough sometimes with the funding climate at the moment and even back then.
Thanks a lot. So Professor Channon, when you look back, what would you say was the biggest misconception when you were applying for grants or funding and at that career stage?
Yeah, I think that the obvious one when I look back was that I spent a very long time agonizing over the details of the proposed scientific project. And being inexperienced, I worried a lot about whether I'd got particular experimental details right or wrong. But when I look back, I think that was less important, and what mattered most was the big question and the nature of the opportunity. It's really about what I call the 3 Ps. It's the people or the person, and it's the place, and only then really it's the project. So the most important things are where you do your research and who you do it with. And it's less about the minutiae of the project itself. If you have a great place and a great supervisor and you meet great colleagues and you're exposed to great science, then what you write in your original grant application matters much less.
So maybe we can now also talk a bit about the bumps in the road. So for Professor Sluimer, can you maybe share a particularly tough rejection of a grant and also how you dealt with this and how did you bounce back to continue?
Well, there's many actually to choose from, but finally the one that made the biggest impact on me was the VD proposal, which is like a mid-career fellowship. My first attempt, it was rejected, and I was really gutted because I really needed the money. I wanted to continue in science, wanted to prove myself, and I didn't get it. So the problem there was that the reviewers didn't believe the markers I proposed for this new cell type, and rather than fighting it, I thought, well, this is my opportunity. I have to embrace this, and that was the topic of next attempt. And of course, no better way than single-cell sequencing to find new cell type-specific markers, and then that led to the success in the second attempt. So that was the main thing.
Thanks a lot. That's very inspiring for all young scientists tuning in. And Professor Channon, was there a moment where you were like, I'm done with this? And what happened what pulled you back in?
Well, I think we've all had that feeling probably at many times during our research career where you've had your grant rejected. One of my mentors told me that if you don't get your grant, then it's all your fault, even when you think the reviewer or the panel hasn't really understood what you were telling them. And of course, that made me even more angry. But after a while, I settled down and I realized that if we haven't written our grant applications clearly, we haven't articulated the question about why it's important, how we're going to address it, how the people and the place we're working at will do something that's different and unique, then we've failed in our job of communicating. He went on to say, communication is always in the mind of the reader, not in the mind of the writer. We may think we've done a great job in articulating why this question is so important and the brilliant science we're going to do to answer the question. But if the panel don't get it, then ultimately that's our fault. So what he was trying to tell me was don't give up, stand back, ask others for advice, listen to that advice, don't just ask them, but listen to the advice, revise, resubmit, and try again.
Thanks, Al. So many early career researchers, they struggle with the imposter syndrome. So we were wondering if you ever had this and also how you dealt with this. To start with Professor Sluimer.
Yeah, that's a very legitimate question, right? Because there's always a nasty reviewer number 3, whether or not it's your own fault or not. And the funding chances are really very low. So I think it happens to everybody, and including to me, mostly actually later in my career. So after I was promoted to professor, then I felt so much pressure to perform that I experienced whether I was the person to do this job. And the only way I overcome was just I had these great colleagues, great science buddies, and a great team that kept giving me confidence and comforting words and assuring me that what we were doing was really great. And then together with the great science, finally I realized, okay, it is okay. I am a good scientist. I deserve to be here. It's okay. Just keep on going.
How was it for you, Professor Channon?
Well, I think science is about the unknown rather than only the known. So to some extent, scientists are all imposters in the sense that there's lots of things we just don't know. That's why we do science. It's important, of course, not to convince yourself that you're not an imposter and therefore know everything, because then that's when people become poor researchers. It's okay not to know. I think there's a certain phase of researchers' careers where that feels not very secure. It's okay when you're a student, and when you're at my stage of my career, it's okay to say I don't know, because you rely on your students and your postdocs to keep you educated. But of course, even early career researchers, they are truly experts in some things, maybe in a very narrow area, but they are often the expert in the area that they're focusing on. So science isn't about knowing, science is about asking and learning, and it's okay to feel that you don't know everything about the field that you're working in.
Thanks a lot. I'm pretty sure this is very inspiring for many of the young researchers here. So, Professor Sluimer, what's one strategy you swear by when applying for big grants?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Keith Channon already told me the big questions, always go for the big questions. And once you have that big question, in our group we do a brainstorm about how to solve that big question. Then I sort of scribble down on my piece of paper my aims, my hypothesis, and once I've got that sorted, I start writing. And then after it's written, I always ask feedback on the text from both expert and non-experts, because of this writing. It's in the eye or the mind of the reader. And then finally, also when you get to the stage of interviews, always do mock interviews, preferably 2, and not just to be aware that you're super prepared for all the possible questions and it's all smooth.
And Professor Channon, how is this for you? Any non-negotiables that should be included in these submissions?
I think the content of an individual submission depends upon the opportunity that you're putting your grant in for. But I would agree with you that there are some fundamental aspects of any grant, whether it's a small project grant, an individual fellowship, or a multi-euro program across 20 countries. You have to articulate the high-level big question as to why it's important. And you have to set out, often in those first few paragraphs, they're the go, no-go. If you've lost your reviewer or your panel after page 1, it's really hard to get back from that. So you need a very clear narrative as to why this question is important. And you lead your reader, ideally in a seamless manner, to the point where they're agreeing with you when you get to the hypothesis and the questions. If at any point during that you've lost them, it gets very difficult. If it's going to be an interview, practice, 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 and then practice again. Don't be shy, don't be secretive, that won't help you. Show your document, show your slides to as many as your trusted colleagues as you can, and don't just show them, but listen to what they say and take it on board. If an educated but non-expert colleague or audience can't understand what you're trying to do and why you're doing it and how you're going to do it, it's unlikely the grant's going to succeed. So that's the absolute requirement before you send it in.
So that's a great advice, and actually that's my next question, that if you had to give one piece of advice to an early career stage scientist about applying for a big funding in the cardiovascular research field, what would that be, Professor Sluimer?
Well, I would go one step before. I think if for the PhD students maybe, is that you try and get some smaller grants early on, so you get in the small wins, and that will really make a difference for how reviewers will look at your CV. And I think in my case that really made a difference early on. And always ask advice to other people, and don't be shy. It's exactly the same.
Thank you. And how about you, Professor Chan?
Yeah, for me it's all about choosing the right question. It's about making sure that you have a question which is a challenge which you can address. You do it in the right place with the right people, and you formulate a project. Those are the key things. Test the ideas with others, listen to others, and involve other people, because team science is ultimately much more effective than an individual effort.
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned before, we also want to open the floor to you, the live audience here at the EAS conference. So if you have any question, just raise your hand and we can bring down the mic.
Maybe I start. Thank you so much for your insights. They're really valuable for us. For your first grant, how do you distinguish the project from your supervisor's work? So how do you say, okay, now it's my time to be independent?
Yeah, that is a difficult one, right? So for me, it was different because actually during my PhD, my 2 projects of my supervisor failed, and he gave me the freedom to write a new one. So from that moment on, it felt as my own, and it was my own. So when I'm trying to supervise my postdocs now, I try to see if they can find a topic where they can use their expertise, or our shared expertise, but go to PubMed and find something that is actually there, so they really have a different niche. So reading, I think.
I think it's a delicate balance. I would go as far as saying that independence for early or mid-career researchers is overrated. You have to be very careful not to allow independence to become the thing that drives your science, because there are so many important questions that remain even in a Nobel Prize winner's laboratory. There are still many important questions that an early career researcher can pick up on. And of course, the advantage of not being fully independent is that you benefit from the people and the place, the environment, and all of the excellence that goes there. So certainly pick something that you will make an individual contribution in and could clearly be the step of a long research career. But don't allow independence per se to be the driver of everything that you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
So I usually writing a grant takes so much time. How can we balance our time for writing a grant between our clinical duties, other research or other publications?
Or with your family life, maybe, or your hobbies. Yeah, it's tough. So for me, basically, what works is that I focus on the deadlines of the grants at the beginning of the year. I set the stage, and then I block just big blocks in my calendar for certain days and a time, so that you don't have these little bits that are no sense. So that's how it works for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't get protected timetable time, do we, to write grants? I think you need some protected time to think and to create those ideas. So that's important to schedule in your plan. I think there are lots of opportunities. It's not just writing the grant, it's the ideas. So conferences like this one, visits to other universities when you're invited to go to a workshop or give a talk at a seminar. And also I think the other aspect is once you've got the idea and the framework, quite a few of the steps of physically writing grants you can do in short blocks of time. So that's opportunistic. What you can't do is think about what your next big idea is going to be. So it's a balance of using those little bits of time and those day-to-day opportunities that crop up anyway, those conversations, those meetings, those seminars. But you've got to complement it with some time where you think, what do I want to do in the next few years? And where's my research going to go next?
Thank you so much. This was incredibly insightful, Professor Channon and Professor Sluimer. Thank you both so much for accepting our invitation and also sharing your journey and all the obstacles and giving us a lot of advices and sharing your wisdom with us.
And of course also to everybody here with us live and also our listeners later on. Thank you for being part of the AtheroTalk. If you haven't signed up yet, there's a QR code you can scan and you can follow us for also more episodes. So we hope today's conversation also sparks your own grant writing and grant winning ideas, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was really nice. And just reach out if you have any more questions that you haven't asked at the moment.
Really great to participate in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So until next time, keep asking questions and push boundaries. Thank you.